Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you, Gift, for that rousing introduction. He was getting me fired up backstage, getting me excited. And thank you, more importantly, Gift, for all the work that you're doing to get young people involved in preserving and improving democracy. And I want to thank all of you. The panelists that we just saw, I was backstage watching the panel on an inclusive economy. I told them I am such a policy nerd. I was listening to everything, and it was scintillating and enlightening. And so I'm grateful for all the panelists that we've had. I want to thank our partners at Columbia University, my alma mater, and the University of Chicago, where I taught law for a decade. I want to thank them for being part of the inaugural Obama Foundation Democracy Forum. Now, since its inception, our foundation's mission has been to inspire, empower, and connect the next generation of change makers. And all of you, most of you in the audience, fall in that category. We now have a global network of thousands of leaders, not just here in the United States, but in every corner of the globe, in Europe, in Africa, in the Asia-Pacific region, in Latin America. They're entrepreneurs and elected officials, nonprofit leaders and grassroots activists, artists and journalists and educators, all of them tackling some of the most vital issues of our time. From climate change to income inequality, from efforts to reduce racial and ethnic conflict to efforts to expand opportunity for women and girls. And I just have to say, the determination and the passion of these leaders, many of whom are here, are already making an impact in lives saved, environments restored, children educated. Many of you are creating new models for clean energy generation, new ways of thinking about poverty alleviation, and it is inspiring. It's a little humbling, because I really didn't have my act together like you guys did at your age. And the good news is we're just scratching the surface of what's next, what this next generation is capable of. In fact, today I'm happy to announce that because all of you have shown what's possible, because of the consistently high interest in our programs, we will be launching a new and expanded Leaders USA program in the coming months that can help more young people put their idealism to work. Now, one of our goals is to create a community and shared platform for these emerging leaders so they can learn from each other and share best practices and form strategic partnerships across issues and across borders. And one thing that's become obvious in these conversations is that progress on so many of the issues that they are fighting for is linked to a broader commitment to democratic values, a belief in the dignity and worth of all people, a belief in rule of law and the accountability that comes from representative government, a belief in human rights and the free exchange of ideas. And as I know has been noted in many of the conversations that have already taken place today, these democratic ideas are currently under assault around the world. We see a manifestation of it in the unjustified and brutal war in Ukraine. We see it in the backsliding that's taking place in what were well-established democracies. We see it in the escalating polarization and disinformation that's so evident in recent elections, whether it's in Brazil, the Philippines, Italy, Sweden, right here in the United States. And let me be clear here, the threat to democracy doesn't always run along a conservative, liberal, left-right axis. This has nothing to do with traditional partisan lines or policy preferences. What we're seeing, what's being challenged, are the foundational principles of democracy itself. The notion that all citizens have a right to freely participate in selecting who governs them. The notion that votes will be counted, and the party that gets more votes wins. That losers concede, that power is transferred peacefully, that the winners don't abuse the machinery of government to punish losers and entrench themselves and make it impossible for other parties to compete in future elections. The notion that judiciary should be independent, and that nobody's above the law, and that our political debate should at least aspire to be rooted in facts and logic rather than fabrication and propaganda. So that's the reason for this forum. You know, we've had big gatherings, particularly before the pandemic, of young leaders before, but we wanted to sharpen our focus on what's happening. You know, we thought it was time for us to sharpen our focus on what's happening to democracy today. And in what we hope will be a regular event, we want this gathering to bring together some of the remarkable young leaders in our network, young people like GIF, with some of the top thinkers and practitioners in the field, so we can take a hard look at the trends that have put democratic pluralism on the defensive, to see if we can start developing the tools to rebuild a stronger democratic culture and a more durable set of democratic institutions for the future. Now, you'll be surprised to hear that we probably won't figure this out in the next 48 hours. The reasons for democratic backsliding are complicated. They are varied. Globalization and unprecedented technological change have disrupted long-standing economic and social arrangements in every corner of the planet and at head-spinning pace. And that's brought or exacerbated growing inequality. You've got a warming planet and violent conflicts, and that has helped trigger more and more instances of mass migration, creating changing demographics and cultural conflicts. There's the reemergence of China and India and other countries as global powers, and so we see a multipolar world that can escalate into ethnic-based nationalism. And of course, we're in the midst of an information revolution. Much of it, which is built on commercial platforms that find controversy and conflict more profitable than tolerance and truth. So there are a lot of factors that are weakening the foundations of democracy. And in this inaugural forum, we've identified a few of these issues to start digging deeper. First, how can we create, as you just heard in the previous panel, a more inclusive and sustainable model of capitalism so that people feel they've got real economic opportunity and have a stake in the forces that govern their lives? Second, how can we reimagine both our traditional and social media platforms to curb toxic disinformation and encourage a healthier exchange of ideas? And the third question, the subject of this panel, is how can we strengthen the forces of pluralism in an increasingly diverse world? And as tough as the other questions are, this one may be the toughest, because it doesn't just involve fixing the mechanics of elections or putting the right economic policies in place. What makes the topic of this panel tough is that it raises basic questions about culture and values and identity. And a lot of times those of us who are interested in democracy promotion have tried to wish away these so-called culture war questions. We like to focus on rules and law and policy and calculations, and we tend to see politics and governance as this constant negotiation between competing, rational, self-interested actors. But that's not how most of us experience the world. We may operate on the basis of very concrete material interests. We need to have our basic needs met, wanting higher wages, affordable housing, health care when we get sick, security in our old age. All that's important. But we also care deeply about having a coherent story about who we are and our place in the world. We care deeply about a sense of identity and a sense of belonging and a sense of status, a sense that our lives mean something and that they have a higher purpose. And long before democratic forms of government became widespread, most people around the planet found answers to these questions in traditional social networks and institutions. And guess what? The majority of people still do. We find identity and meaning in family and religion, in tribe and in nationality, in our occupations, in our language, our customs, in gender roles, in our geography, our sense of place. And democracy is not supposed to eliminate these vital sources of connection. Instead, the pluralist idea, at least, assumes that each of us are born into different communities with different loyalties and traditions, identities that are shaped not just through our families, but through mediating institutions like religious bodies or ethnic and civic associations and unions and professional organizations, regional affiliations. And so then these diverse communities are supposed to come together as a national community under an agreed upon set of rules, maybe a constitution. And these diverse communities are the building blocks for political parties. And that's how people pursue their interests and form alliances. And then they negotiate and horse trade on a bigger stage. That's the theory anyway. Now, in practice, we know that such an ideal conception of democracy often worked in a lot of countries and often still works by excluding certain people and communities from power. Those people, the outgroups, were silenced, or they were rendered invisible, or otherwise subjugated because of race, or gender, or religion, or ethnicity. And one of humanity's greatest achievements in the modern era has been the recognition of this injustice, a commitment to ending notions of caste, an insistence that for any genuine democracy to function, all people need a seat at the table. Not just ethnic, racial, and religious minorities, but also women and members of the LGBTQ+ community and people with disabilities. And as uneven as that progress has been, just the fact that that ideal has taken root in so many places around the world, that is powerful, that is remarkable. And that's happened basically in my lifetime. And I'm not that old, as I remind my children. But that progress makes democracy a whole lot more complicated. For one thing, it's easier for people to agree on stuff when the majority of people look the same, worship the same way, and share the same traditions. It's harder as societies become more diverse and everybody is at the table. Second, people who are accustomed to being at the top of the pecking order, people whose identities in part have been shaped by a sense of the privilege and power of their group compared to these other groups, well, they're likely to feel their status in society is threatened when the existing order goes through rapid changes. And politics starts feeling like a zero-sum game. Your gain must mean my loss. And third, what's thought of as important in upholding traditions for one group. For example, let's say segregation of the sexes at religiously affiliated institutions. That may feel to another group, understandably, like a violation of their rights. And in such circumstances, politics may no longer feel like just a way to divvy up the economic pie or figure out the best way to build roads and schools, the kind of stuff where we feel comfortable compromising and splitting differences. Instead, it now starts feeling like our core values and our identities are under assault. And that not only our political opponents, but our governing institutions and even democracy itself are the culprit. That the game is rigged and they're out to get us. Now, you mix in the fact that the spread of modern global capitalism really has, often ruthlessly, reorganized work and disrupted communities and rewarded individual mobility over cooperation and solidarity. People are moving around, extended families don't see as much of each other, membership in mediating institutions steadily decline. People feel more isolated than ever. And pretty soon, genuine communities, with all their richness and complexity, are replaced with virtual communities that narrow our conceptions of who we are and what's important and who we're connected to. And online media encourages this, since you're more likely to click onto sites and read messages that reinforce your preconceived notions. And the people who are most active on social media tend to be the ones who are most controversial and emphasize their differences with other groups. That's what gets attention. And of course, politicians learn, or relearn because they've known this for a long time, that one of the easiest ways to win votes is to tap into people's growing sense of anxiety and fear and vertigo, their sense of loss, their resentment of change, and to tell them that their tradition and their values, their very identities are under attack by outsiders, by them, whether it's foreigners or immigrants or gay people or cosmopolitan elites. And you add it all up, and you've got a recipe for backlash and polarization and the sort of toxic slash and burn, anything goes politics that we've seen erupt just about everywhere. And it is dangerous. Because, like it or not, diversity is not going away. The claims of the previously excluded are not going away. We're not going backwards 50 years demographically. And history tells us that when our identities are reduced to a single characteristic, our race, our sex, our nationality, our tribe, conflict follows. So we're going to have to figure out how to find overlap and a sense of multiple identities. And we're going to have to figure out how to live together, or we will destroy each other. So what do? As you might expect, I've got a few ideas. I promise not to go into too much detail here. One thing I do know, rather than shy away from these cultural questions, we have to take them head on. I believe those of us who believe in democracy have to acknowledge the anxieties and frustrations that rapid economic and cultural and demographic changes have brought, and we have to find a language, a story, of how we can affirm the best of traditional values in our respective countries, our respective communities. We have to create a space for our differences while insisting that our politics and our governmental institutions uphold the overarching principles of equality for all people. I think we have to rebuild healthy mediating institutions, worker organizations, civic associations, religious associations, trade groups, both in the real world and the virtual world. And they need to be adapted to how we live today. And they have to operate from the bottom up. And we have to find ways of bringing people from different backgrounds together in these groups so we can all develop better habits of listening to each other and debating each other and making group decisions together for the common good. I think we're going to need to expand the civic education that we provide our children, and we have to make it hands-on and relevant so they can practice the skills of citizenship. And I believe we have to find ways to harness the power of information technologies, whether it's through better industry practices, government regulation, innovative new business models, so they promote more trust and cooperation and less anger and fear. None of this will be easy. Renewing our democratic culture will take decades and not years. And that is why the ideas of a 61-year-old ex-president are less relevant than the ideas and insights of a new generation of leaders who are better attuned to the changes that are taking place around the world, and by the way, will be the ones that carry democracy's torch into the future. So, I'd like to bring a few of those leaders up to the stage right now so you can hear about the work they're already doing on this front. Please welcome D'Suva, Londi, Nick, and Natalia.